Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about something that's quite complex and nuanced, and I'm going to try and cover it in a relatively sort of brief essay, but let's see how we go here. It's about nationalisation of key industries following World War II, which happened across much of the Western world. Some of it had already happened during the Great Depression. Effectively, it was industries that were thought to be for the common good of the wider populace, should be owned by government rather than be in the hands of profit-making, exploitative private wealth. So things like railways, mines, telephones, telephone communications, electricity generation, water, dams and water distribution and so on. This was all to be in government hands. And what wasn't in government hands was acquired by the governments, many governments, not all, but many governments following World War II. Some countries, even the banks, the financial industry was nationalised. Now, there was a lot of sort of still quite leftist views floating around, some of which were not unreasonable, by the way, following the Great Depression, which had stung pretty much all policymakers, political, economic and otherwise, and as they looked for ways to make sure something like that never happened again. And one of those, this is very sort of ideological, I guess, but one of the ways was, well, if things like rail, services for the common good, for the common people, were owned by government, then there couldn't be any issue of exploitation by private capital. And just on the face of it, that was reasonable enough. Would it work in real life and in a politicized environment? Well, that's quite another matter. And it's all very well to have starry-eyed theory, but can it be delivered in practice? Now, that changed, and I'll come back to that again in a minute, but that changed in the 1990s when governments were hard-pressed for cash, and they wanted to sell off these, many of them inefficient, by the way. The feather bedding was insane, but sell off these industries to private capital. But because they were monopolies, they were government-owned, the people weren't being exploited, therefore it was a monopoly, because there was no need for competition. So they were selling them off, privatizing these monopoly industries, such as transport and telephones on. They were selling them off, privatizing them, and in most cases, not every single one, but in most cases, they were sold off to private capital for vast under-the-table payments and all sorts of things. And the government was able to take huge chunks of money, just shove it into consolidated revenue, like no accountability on how that was spent, and then use that money for the Great Society and giving welfare to people and all sorts of vote-buying programs that did nothing for society. And then these private companies with their monopolies, of course, would shed lots of workers and put up the prices and exploit the very public that they were ostensibly meant to be protected by the nationalisation. Now, what this did, though, is it created a new level or strata, if you like, of relationship between big finance, because they were the only ones that could mobilise the capital to buy these huge industries. It created a new relationship between government and the private finance, big finance, and it gave big finance a control over government policy and an interaction with the political establishment that still exists to this day from the 1990s. And I think it was injurious in the extreme for the Western economies, because it effectively has resulted in centrally planned economy. Big finance came in and said, okay, well, we'll give you all this money, but in return, you have to give us control of the market. We don't want to have competition, because that erodes our profits and creates uncertainty. We don't want to have any risk. We want to make huge returns, and we don't want any political interference in making it. And in return for that, we'll employ all your relatives in cozy jobs, and so on and so forth. So these sorts of, and this mentality has stayed, and this relationship has stayed. Now, through that conduit of that government big money monopoly, centrally planned sort of relationship through that conduit. The globalists have come in, and it's through this medium and this strata of interaction that they're forcing through globalist policies. So that's where, that's the bedrock of, if you like, where it's happening. Until those relationships of big finance in bed with big government and monopolies and centrally planned economies, and we'll give you risk-free business. You want some more workers? Not a problem. We'll bring them in from Africa. That type of thing. Until that's unwound, the sovereignty, political and economic sovereignty of the Western nations won't be recovered. It won't exist. And that needs to be unwound. And it's like a dagger to the heart, I think, of all Western economies and nation states at the moment, and has been for some time. Now, coming back to the post-war period and the nationalisation of industries, again on the idea, nationalising the rail industry or whatever it was, or parts of the economy that weren't nationalised previously. I actually, in a prima facie theoretical basis, have no problem with that. If it's for the common good, for the common benefit, maybe separating that from the common good, the common benefit, the rail network in this case, or other things. Again, it could be the electricity generation or telephone communications. But given it's for the common benefit, then I don't see a problem with government owning it, because if it's in the private hands, then they will use it to profiteer unless there's a huge commitment made to market competition. The only way you're going to deliver, if you like, price justice, if I can use that rather socialist term, to the people, to the consumer, is by competition. Competition works because you have to try and always produce or create or deliver a better product at a better price or on more convenient terms, or that you have to deliver something that's of perceived value to the consumer if your product is going to do any good. But as soon as you move to monopoly or oligopoly, then you don't need to worry about how good your product is, because you are protected. If people want it, they got to come to you to buy it. So, and this is the problem with monopolies under any and all circumstances. Why do you have to deliver a better service when the customers are forced to come to you? Now, in the case of monopolies or situations where the government is hugely influential, it could be, say, in the case of Britain, the British car industry, the government was handing over gazillions of dollars to the car industry, and in return they wanted influence. So whenever the government gives you money, they will always want some sort of influence. Even today, in things like local sports clubs, the government say, "I will give you $10,000, but in return you have to have all your coaches now have to be black lesbians." So you cannot avoid this influence for money type, and politicians will always see it that way. Hey, we're giving you money, you got to do something for us. We can always take the money away if that's what you want. So these are the conversations that happen. Hitherto, government patronage could decide this, but now it's big finance is dictating to government, and through big finance, of course, the globalists are pushing their agenda. But coming back again to the this post-war era, so there's all these monopolies, such as rail and so on. Now, politicians cannot keep their hands off things. If they can do a quiet backdoor, backroom fix on something and then appear high achieving and virtuous in the eyes of the public, they'll take that path every time. And the more useless the politician, the more they're likely to do it. But they were, say unemployment was increasing in a certain area, then they would build a railway repair yard or maintenance yard in that area where unemployment was increasing, and they would just start employing thousands of people. Were those people needed? Well, no. Was it a good idea to put the rail repair yard? Well, no. It had no wider. It didn't make any sense at all from an economic, logistical, administrative, or any other point of view. But it achieved a political purpose, and therefore things were so over the years with rail, or you could pick any other industry really. many more people than were needed were employed. They could have run the whole rail. For example, I just use round numbers to illustrate the point here. They could have easily run the rail network on 100 people. Again, this is a round numbers thing, 100 people, but they employed 900 people. So the costs were out of control, and the government, of course, owning this, is paying for this through taxpayer dollars. The revenue nowhere near covers the cost of administering the rail network. So the cost of all this feather bedding of employing way more people than are needed and all this sort of stuff, this is coming out of consolidated tax revenue. So the consumer is paying, well, the ticket price for the fare, the train fare, but also they're paying through the tax system and consolidated revenue. Now, the government has an option of putting up the ticket price to cover things, but then that's politically unsustainable. So politics comes back in again. So they can do a backdoor gig through using consolidated revenue to keep the rail system afloat, then that's okay. But then they've got now many nationalised industries, not just rail, but car manufacturing and telephones, a whole range of things that are no longer paying their way because they've been politicised. Not just politicised in hiring too many workers, although there's definitely that. Also, the penetration of the trade unions was extreme and allowed to happen. And there was no sense of cooperation. Everybody, management and unions and workers, everybody thought money was growing on trees, and it somehow, out of consolidated revenue, there was no accountability for revenue and performance and, delivering a service and so on. So it all came out of consolidated revenue. Thus, it was a problem far away, and unions, who were quite militant, by the way, and often you would find, unions and management who were spoiling for a punch-up. But at the same time, by the way, it's not just the case of workers feather bedding, too many workers being employed. Nearly any prestigious or well-paid management role was a political crony flunky. It was somebody's brother, sister, relative, mistress. There was hardly anybody who was being appointed because they were competent in the management ranks. There would have inevitably been some, I suppose, but certainly in what I saw, I've seen going around in business over decades, is I'm aghast at how useless some of these people are. In Australia, in the what was what was once called telecom, I couldn't believe the low standard of management. It was a shock to me just how low quality these people were. But they were all politically well connected, and they were being delivered these very well paid jobs. All these external consultancies that, again, were just useless. I came across one years ago now, many years ago, where there was a retained consultant to talk about washroom etiquette. That was there. Someone had signed off on this somewhere, and this guy was being paid. Again, this would have been 35 years ago. This guy was being paid $20,000 a month, I think it was, to advise on how to wash your hands with soap and water in the washroom. And so he would just get some sort of like he'd buy something, at the bookshop or whatever that talked about personal hygiene. He'd photocopy it. Seriously, he'd just photocopy that, and he'd hand that in as his monthly report. And he's being paid $20,000 a month for that. But imagine this multiplied by thousands of people, all of whom have political connections. And again, the politicians, once they have control of something, they use it to reward and benefit friends and relatives, and they don't have to put something recorded on the books as an expense. They can just push it on to one of these quangos, these government-owned entities or monopolies in this case, and it all just comes out of the miasma of consolidated revenue. So no one's accountable, no one has to actually sign off on it, and no one has to. There's no sort of paper trail that audit trail that can be used. So it became the perfect dumping ground for all sorts of political things. But it was always a political decision, and not a business decision or a commercial decision or any other decision. It was politicized in some way. So what ended up happening was these monopolies these government nationalised monopolies had become so shot through with political decisions of all sorts, hiring too many people and so on, putting maintenance regards and manufacturing places in positions or locations that were purely political, not sensible in any other way, and so the cost, the accumulated sort of drag on consolidated revenue became immense. Gazillions upon gazillions. In England there was the coal board as well, nationalising coal, which again on the face of it initially was reasonable enough, but not the way things were handled, and it gave unions and all sorts of people a lot of expectations. Coal was being dug out of the ground for. It was cost, for example, I'll use simple. It was costing £100 to dig a ton of coal out the ground, but it could only be sold for $30, and it's $100 to extract. Now, for some reason, nobody stops to think, well, that's not going to last very long, surely. But instead, it was the unions and a lot of the feather bedding management, even a lot of the political class. Who cares? Consolidated revenue. And again, the taxpayer was paying for this through the back door. I don't think that enough effort was made to try and work something out on things like the coal, but nonetheless. So the governments around the Western world are all going through the same thing. All of these industries are horribly politicised. And so they think we got to get rid of these things. So along comes big finance. You know what? We'll take that monopoly off your hands. The rail network or the coal mining, whatever, we'll take it off your hands. And what's more, we'll pay you a premium for it. But in return, you have to allow us to keep the monopoly, no price controls. We don't want any competition. We want an absolute monopoly, charge whatever money we want, and we want the ability to get rid of however many staff we want and so on. And we want the ability to use offshore finance. We don't pay local tax, and we want this and we want that. But we'll give you big bucks up front. We'll just hand you a shit cash of money. And also, by the way, just make a list of all your relatives, friends, mistresses, and so on, who you want to be given, juicy consultancy jobs, because there'll only be a few hundred of those, and we'll take care of them, so everybody's happy. So, and by the way, when you retire from politics, we'll give you a gig on the board of directors. Done. And they couldn't shake hands on these deals quick enough. Now, it was through that device. Now, it's sometimes called public-private partnership, and they give it all sorts of names. But that's the device through which, I believe at least, that's the device through which the globalists inserted their influence, that they bought off the political class with these political private partnerships. And they corrupted them, made sure that these useless low IQ morons were given waterfront mansions and all sorts of prestige and glory and jobs and this sort of stuff. Things that they could never have got on their own merits. But it brought in a huge amount of influence into the very centre of the economy. But in return for this, the economy is now planned. There's no competition here. There's just monopolies, whether they function in strictly commercial terms, or the monopolies that, in the sense that no competition is allowed, or monopolies in the sense that there's such a massive entry cost into this particular market segment to compete that nobody bothers. Governments have no interest in creating competition, because that would mean they'd get a lesser price for the thing when the rail network, when it does get sold. And also, if it's competitive, the profits will be skinnier, so there'll be no cozy jobs for the politicians and their buddies. Now, it's into this sort of thing. If you look, it's these same industries, the ones that get government protection, and the ones that are avoiding competition. These are the ones that are the places that are bringing in the vast numbers of third world peasant immigrants and illiterate peasants and so on. These are the ones that pushing the Green New Deal, pushing the propaganda. These are the exact same organisations that are really at the absolute forefront, the full-on cheer squad for all the globalist key points, and the ones through which the World Economic Forum if you look at the World Economic Forum people that turn up at Davos each year, they're the ones that are at the forefront of this. There's this anti-competitive, centrally planned, massive profiteering by the financial sector. and the government's taking a very hands-off approach to. Here's another thing: you look at the amount of startup businesses in the West, high tech or whatever it is, startup businesses, and how many of these are bought out by the big multinationals. Where as soon as they show any promise, the inventor will be gone to, look, we'll give you, 20 million bucks, which is, life changing for people in that situation. We'll give you 20 million bucks, but we own it, and you walk away. And so these businesses never see the light of day. They're absorbed into these big multinationals. So the competitive nature of capitalism, the disruptive competitive nature of capitalism, the ability for it to recreate itself is being tragically and drastically eroded just through this. So this is my view, that this selling off of public assets, such as, again, the rail networks and so on. This was the beginning of this provided the springboard for the globalists to really take control. I think without that, they either wouldn't have control, or it would have taken them a great deal longer, with many more compromises along the way, which would have softened the whole thing quite a bit. But once these people gain control, well, we want cheap labour to come in. You damn well bring those illiterate black peasants into the country. Otherwise, we're going to get rid of you. You're going to lose your waterfront mansion, and by the way, we'll fire your mistress. And so on. So that's the corruptibility of the political class is on full display, and this was the entry point and the magnification point through which it happened. You've been a Tassos today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.